wakes you up in a world like that is a love of another human being.
It's transcendence. I totally agree. My understanding, you would know better than I would, is that it's now a best-selling book in Russia again.
1984?
Yeah, it's actually
That's
being
interesting.
downloaded more. There was a piece on NPR. I heard about this actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope it's because they're looking for love.
That's what I was just going to say. Hopefully, not in all the wrong places.
Hey, there's no such thing as the wrong places. But that's my opinion. I'm the one that showed up naked and drunk to your classroom.
I'm still surprised that was you.
I was wearing a wig. I'm sorry. Quick pause. Can I take a bathroom break?
Yeah.
And we're back. John Wilkes Booth assassinated Abraham Lincoln. In his diary, as you write in your book, he wrote about Lincoln, "Our country owed all her troubles to him, and God simply made me the instrument of his punishment. The country is not what it was." What was the ideal of the country that John Wilkes Booth believed in? You talked about this country that just constantly being repeated in his writing.
For John Wilkes Booth and many other people who are close to the southern part of the country in the Confederacy, they believe the country should be a democracy for white people, a bounded democracy. And Booth was horrified, and we have to empathize with it, not sympathize, but recognize how strange it seemed to him that all of a sudden those who were slaves were now soldiers with guns. And he was particularly offended when he saw in Washington, D.C., a group of African American Union soldiers holding Southern prisoners of war. And the world was turned upside down for him. Democracy for him, he believed in democracy, but democracy for white people. And that justified mistreating black people for him.
So country means white people.
Yeah. And I don't think it's that different from
and white Christians.
White Christians, yes. Yeah, he was not arguing for Jewish emancipation either. I don't think that's really different from what we've seen in the 20th century for people who justify ethnic cleansing or genocide. Let's go to the extreme example of Hitler again that we've talked about before. His view was actually he claimed he wanted a democracy for Germany. He wanted a democracy of the right Germans, and he wanted those who he saw infecting and mongrelizing the society out. That's in essence what John Wilkes Booth thought.
The scary thing is those kinds of ideas, you can put a pretty face on them. Like you don't have to use, and maybe Hitler didn't until the war started, or even parts of the war, make it so clear that you just want the certain kind of Germans that have made Germany a great nation to be the people that are running that nation, and other people who are not truly interested in don't hold the interest of the country at heart. They should go elsewhere where they can flourish also. It's wonderful. But like the good Germans, they've built all these amazing things. We should give them the power and not to the others. And you can put a bunch of flowery language around that.
Precisely. It's the argument that's made all the time today against immigration, that the wrong people are coming into our society. It's ironic because it's often made by those who themselves are immigrants. History teaches us that those who have arrived as immigrants are no more likely to like those who come. In fact, they might be against the next group for just this reason, because they think they're the right group.
Can you describe to me if it's useful at all to know the difference, if there's a difference between white nationalism, white supremacism, and Christian nationalism? Yeah. Is there intersection between them? I've heard these terms used. Oh, separatism too, right? That is there interesting distinction that permeated that history that still lasts today?
I think there's a long history in the United States of a belief in white supremacy, and it's not unique to the United States. We actually inherit this from Europe. And white supremacy is the belief that for whatever reason, those with lighter color skin, usually of Northern European extraction, are superior, have more rights, are the better people to make decisions, all sorts of things. That it's an aesthetic judgment as much as it is a political judgment, and that gets embedded in our society, right? We inherit that. Christian nationalism is the presumption that it's not just your race, but now it's also your Christian belief. Mm-hmm. And that is actually relatively new. There are little pieces of that in our history. But many of those who are white supremacists, even those in the Confederacy, are not Christian nationalists. because they don't agree on which kind of Christianity, and they don't view those who are from a different denomination of Christianity as being good Christians. There isn't this big tent Christianity in the 19th century. This notion that there is one Christian nation and that we're all part of it, that's actually really a 20th century creation. It precedes the evangelical movement, but it's been made even more popular. But it would not make sense to a Confederate to say we're a white Christian nation. It would make sense to say we're a white Protestant nation because they didn't consider Catholics good Christians, or a white Presbyterian nation. And so that's something new. And I think what's particularly dangerous about this notion of Christian nationalism is it creates this false history, saying we've always been together as Christians. That's always how we've defined ourselves, and that's not accurate.
Well, one interesting thing. So I recently talked to a left-leaning or maybe a far-left political streamer named Destiny, Stephen Bonnell. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He does live streaming debates with people. It's very passionate.
I've heard of this. My students have told me. I'm not actually seen it. My students are always up on the most hip things.
Yes, that is no. The funny thing about him, he's already considered like a boomer. He's already the old streamer because he's been doing it for 10 years. He's not the cool kids anymore. Anyway, he goes into some difficult political territory, and he actually had a mini conversation with Nick Fuentes. And he says, I mean, some of it is humor, but some of it is pretty dark, hard-hitting sort of criticism. He says that anyone who claims to be a Christian nationalist asks them if they would rather have 1 million people who are atheists from Sweden who are white come, or if you would rather have 1 million people from Africa who are Christian come. And the truth comes out that this is a very surface level. This kind of idea of Christian nationalism is still underneath it is a deep racism toward like hatred towards black people.
I think I'm sure that's right. That's
the sense I got into. It does not seem to have deep kind of like historical context to it. It's just a rebranding of the old kind of hate.
What I think is important though in drawing this distinction and why it really matters beyond the history of it is someone like Lincoln quotes scripture all the time. The second inaugural address, the Gettysburg Address, filled with biblical references. But he does it in a way that's not Christian nationalist because he's using the text to bring people together. He's using it as a fable of humanity. And you could say he's not open to Islamic thinking. He's ignorant of the Islamic world. But as a Jew, I'm a Jew, reading and studying Lincoln, I know he's a Christian, but I don't feel excluded from his rhetoric because I share that Bible. We have different views, but I don't feel excluded. It actually brings people together. The Christian nationalist approach that we've seen in the 20th century, and especially in recent decades, is intended to divide people. It excludes Jews. It excludes Christians who don't interpret Christianity their way. And to say that's what we've always done is an entire distortion of our country. And it also hides why this is so dangerous. Insofar as Christianity matters to our country, it should be in the way Lincoln uses it, as a set of common texts that many of us resonate with, knowing that we have different rituals and different understandings, not as a way to exclude people and not as a cover for racism, which is what it is.
It's kind of interesting that you could talk about, I've talked to a lot of people, Muslim folks, Jewish folks, Christian folks. There's a way to talk about religion that's inclusive and then that's exclusive.
Exactly.
I mean, it's just been... I've been listening to a lot of these interfaith conversations, and they're awesome. They like celebrate the beauty of each religion. They banter and argue with each other about details and so on. But like, it feels like love. Like it feels like anybody from any of those religions would feel welcome at that party.
Yeah, and I think that's possible.
Can you tell me about the disputed election of 1876?
So this is fascinating. The 1876 election is one of many elections. We've had some recently that are intensely controversial. And they're controversial because they're so close. They're controversial because it's not always clear who's won. In 1876, Samuel Tilden, the governor of New York, who's running as the Democratic candidate, wins more votes across the country. So everyone knows he becomes president, right? Wrong. He doesn't become president because in 3 states, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, it's very, very close. And even though Tilden has more total votes, if he loses those states, the electors in those states